Okay, so I wanted to welcome everyone and just to this really remarkable group that we've assembled. We're very excited to have them today. And I'm going to just do a brief introduction and then we'll turn it over to them and they can kind of give you their really wonderful presentation. The first one to speak is Dr. Huynh, and she is at the pain clinic at Walter Reed, but she's a retired colonel in the Air Force, and she's been involved in integrative health and medicine for a long, long time. She was really one of the strong forces to move this forward in the Department of Defense. The next speaker is going to be Dr. Reagan Stiegmann. Some of you may have seen her before. She's been on panels about the game changer in terms of the plant-based diet, but she is at the Air Force Academy and is a preventive medicine and flight medicine doc, and she also did her PrevMed residency at USUS where she did lifestyle medicine, so she's kind of been the leader in lifestyle medicine at USU. Then the last speaker is Captain Stepanenko, and he is actually family medicine and has been trained in functional medicine as well. And they're all part of a task force looking at performance, readiness, resilience, and performance of healthcare workers and also the military members. And we've joined with them because we have an interest in the operational community, they have an interest in the medical community, and they're going to kind of give you their vision of how we should move forward as kind of the Department of Defense, what we should be doing to protect ourselves. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Huynh, and she's going to give some presentation, and they're going to kind of roll on to Major Stiegmann and then to Captain Stepanenko. And questions and answers at the end, and please do chat if you want to. If you have some questions, they'll be able to address those at the end. I just also want to wish a happy birthday to Brian Stepanenko because he volunteered to do this on his birthday, so thank you so much. So, Maylin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Doyster, and thank you to CHAM. CHAM stands for the Consortium of Health and Military Performance, and this is a group effort both from CHAM and Task Force Resilience, which you'll hear a little bit later on, and we're so grateful you give us this opportunity to present. So again, my name is Milan. One thing that Patty didn't mention, I am a very proud graduate of the Uniformed Services University, did both my MPH and preventive medicine residency there 20 years ago. And Reagan can talk a little bit more about herself, and Brian as well. We want to let you know that we have no relevant financial or non-financial relationship to disclose. CHAM as well, this is all a labor of love that we want to share with you, and thank you for being here. Also a disclaimer in that our presentation, our own views, they do not represent the view of CHAM, USU, Air Force, Army, Navy, or the Department of Defense. Here are our learning objectives for today. We want to share with you how we feel COVID is exploiting our vulnerability of physiologic fragility in our population. We want to introduce personal protective nutrition, PPN, and personal protective lifestyle, and discuss the relevance and utility of these concepts. When I outline PPN and PPL and how we can all utilize them and share them with our families, our community, our loved one, and our patients so that we can be more resilient. And for those who are involved in healthcare, help us envision how we can incorporate PPN and PPL in the delivery of healthcare so we can optimize military readiness, resilience, and performance. To the end of our presentation, we have a few slides that talk about lifestyle medicine, functional medicine as a national initiative, and how you can get more information if you are interested in training. Just to review the threat of COVID coronavirus is caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS-CoV-2. It is a novel RNA virus, hence our body have not seen it, so we have very limited adaptive immunity. It uses this spike protein on its head to latch on our cells' ACE2 receptors. And we have ACE2 receptors, not only in our respiratory tracts, but also in our cardiac, renal, lungs, kidneys, as well as the nervous system and the gut. So that's why it could interfere and intervene at different places in our body. So in military term, if you think of it, it does act like a smart bomb in that it goes in, it's able to disable our macrophage. Macrophage are immediate innate detector that detect a threat, that somehow is able to disable our macrophage, and that's part of our innate immunity. And hence, we're seeing a long incubation period, up to 14 days before your body shows symptoms. So I'm thinking this virus goes in and it takes up to 14 days before your body actually mount a reaction. Hence, it's not unexpected that we see complications that are like the fog of war, right? Cytokine storm, oxidative stress, endothelial dysfunction, hypoperfusion, and emboli. So I want to highlight the current approach and then the approach that we are proposing. So the current approach nationally is to contain and treat severe complications. And with PPE is wearing a mask, washing your hands, face shield, and physical distancing to prevent exposure. Our national strategy right from the beginning was to flatten the curve to give hospital and ICU time to prepare. And we're currently using testing as secondary prevention as a public health measure to detect those who may be carrier or may be pre-symptomatic. But there's variation in clinical manifestation, people who have no symptoms to severe and death. And then there's variation in treatment, very unique to patient immunity, inflammatory status, that it does not address us as a host factor, nor are there any guidance for outpatient management. We're proposing an immune resilient approach where we integrate the science of prevention with human factor. That is personal protective nutrition and lifestyle, as well we'll introduce to you total force fitness for those in the military. And stratify high-risk personnel or frontline healthcare workers, caregivers, household contacts, as also all patients who have conditions associated with inflammation, oxidative stress, immune dysregulation, or endothelial dysfunction. So this chart just shows you there are those who are pre-symptomatic, and at some point we become symptomatic. But of note, the good news is in the beginning of this pandemic, the CDC estimated 25% may be asymptomatic. There are emerging literature now that shows up to 45% may have no symptoms. And I see that as the resilient group. In the medical system, we put the weighted effort in the sick, like we should, but that's all the vulnerable personnel, those who need hospitalization, ventilators, and ICU. In our presentation, we're going to talk about here, this thing in the middle. How can we enhance our resilience so that we either are asymptomatic, should we be exposed to it, or have very mild symptoms? So let's look at our healthcare system as a whole. In 2013, the National Academy of Sciences reviewed the state of United States health and published this beautiful report. And it turns out we spent, back then 2013 was 8,000 per capita, it's now 10,000. But compared to our peer nations, we have higher mortality, higher death in common diseases. And the report concluded on average, Americans die sooner and experience higher rates of disease and injury than people in other high-income countries. And this health disadvantage exists from birth to age 75, and even advantaged Americans, those who have access to healthcare, who are highly educated, appear to be sicker than their peers in other rich nations. So why is that? So one thing I would propose is looking at our diet. Standard American diet, appropriately called SAD. The National Institute of Health had a report out a couple of years ago, and their conclusion was nearly the entire US population eat a diet that's not on par with recommendations. CDC in 2017 concluded only 1 in 10 Americans eat recommended amount of vegetable and fruit. Think about that. 1 in 10. When I read that report and we were facing this pandemic, I was extremely worried. And the recommendation wasn't that much, 3 cups of vegetables and fruits. And most of us, as you can see in the chart here, exceed sugar, saturated fat, and salt. This chart in the bottom with the red ball comes from the Department of Aquaculture, showing the micro and macronutrient deficiency in our diet. Of note, magnesium being extremely high. Magnesium is a critical mineral for food absorption, for the other vitamins to work, and 68% of Americans are not getting magnesium in our diet. Also, zinc being very important. Zinc stops viruses from replicating. Vitamin C, critical. All these vitamins are really important, as well as vitamin A. And look at the deficiency in our diet. And also, globally, we are facing a pandemic of vitamin D deficiency as well. These charts are busy, but I just want to highlight to the left, you see these come from NHANES data, so they're US national data. It shows for children, only 9% of children actually have optimal vitamin D level, and adults, only 11%. And when they break it down by race and ethnicity, those with darker skin color have greater deficiency. And perhaps that may explain the higher mortality and severe complications we're seeing in African American as well as Hispanic population. The chart to the right is a study came out of Asia. It was a retrospective review, multi-center. The author looked at patients who were admitted to the hospital, at multiple hospital. I think this was done in the Philippines. 212 cases, and what he found with those who have adequate vitamin D level can have better outcomes, or at least optimal vitamin D level does mitigate severe complications. What about the US military? Study published in 2019 showed that there is a widespread vitamin D deficiency among active duty soldiers. The prevalence is as high as 67%. And it's not surprising. You know, this is what our folks wear. They are pretty cover. And military personnel are known to go to work when it's dark outside, and they don't leave until extremely dark. So they do not see a whole lot of sunlight. Obesity is another growing threat in the US military. The chart to the left show a double of obesity rate in the US military from 2011 to 2015. The DoD Health of the Force report that was published last year looked at 2018 data, another double. Went from 8.8% average to 17.4% obesity in the United States military today. So there's a group of retired generals and admirals who started a nonprofit called Mission Readiness, because they realized that obesity, not only on US military, but throughout our country, is a national security issue. Because 71% of our youth today are not eligible to serve in the US military because either they're obese, they can't pass an entrance exam, or have a criminal record. And that is very concerning for our national security. And they introduced what we're going to talk about, PPN and PPL, as a way to solve this nationally. So looks back at a standard American diet. There are research studies to show that when we eat a typical Western, highly processed fast food diet, it triggers what we call the inflammasome pathway. Is exactly the same pathway that we are seeing in COVID complications. So the inflammatory cascade stay and remain. So your body remain at a high inflammation when we eat a standard American diet. And also it trigger immunosenescence, which just means, decline in the immune system. So it's not just about aging chronologically, there's a biological aging that occurs when we eat a standard American diet. So people ask me, does chronological age calculate from the time of your birth, predict biological age? It turns out it predicts to about middle age. And after that, it's really how well you take care of yourself. So this whole thing about aging as a risk factor for COVID, well, we Americans tend to age biologically even faster than our chronological age. I want to call attention to this COVID age calculator. You may want to write it down. It's profile.covid-age.com. And on there, you can go on and you put in your age, your gender, and then it has things like your weight and height, your cholesterol level, vitamin D level, all the risk factors that we've known for COVID. And I'll note on that, the only thing that are not modifiable is your age chronologically and gender. Everything else in terms of risk is modifiable. So our gut, it turns out, it's the headquarters for our immune system, because 70% of our immune system actually sit in our gut. So it's like the Pentagon of our defense. And it also serves as a boot camp, because that's where our immune system get training based on what we eat. So it's not just a GI tract, it's not just for food absorption, it has a role in modulating immune response as well as training our immune system. And there is a growing research evidence on how the gut microbiome impact our health as well as our immune response. And it's a very important topic to the DoD. Several years ago, Department of Defense has a meeting that looked at microbiome health, and there are ongoing research on gut microbiome and health function. So there are a lot of emerging evidence around immune and metabolic resilience as host factor. And you may be thinking, well, why haven't I heard about any of this? Well, it turns out, and I learned this when I was doing my MPH at USU 20 years ago, it turns out it takes 17 years for new evidence findings to reach clinical practice. Well, during a pandemic, we don't have 17 years, so that's why we're sharing this information with you. We want you to take this information, share with others to help build resilience in terms of not just wearing a mask for PPE, but we're going to talk about PPN and PPL. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stiegmann.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Huynh. And I just really want to foot stomp today that our aim in bringing you this content and this dialogue today is really in the vein of, as we shift towards a deep dive with PPN and PPL, but really to integrate and educate at all levels and really to get the widest dissemination possible with command endorsement all the way down to patient, family, friends, and providers as well. So regardless of where you sit on the stratification of where you are in your training, if you're a attending level, or regardless of what allied health component you exist in, this is for you. And we're going to make sure that there is access for everybody on this call to get the handout that we're going to talk about. So we're going to define PPN and PPL. So I will be speaking about PPN, personal protective nutrition, which is defined as food and nutrients that enhance immune and metabolic resiliency to reverse disease and optimize performance. And then after my portion, I'm going to shift over to Dr. Stepanenko, who's going to talk about PPL, personal protective lifestyle, which is defined as activities of daily living that enhance immune and metabolic resiliency to reverse disease and optimize performance. So of course, we have to give our kudos and our shout out to the task force members who have really helped us build this hexagon framework. And this is exactly what we're bringing to the table today for everybody. You will all have access. Thank you so much, CHAMP team. It is in the chat box on the right-hand side. It is also hyperlinked to a lot of CHAMP resources and content for an even further deeper dives. So please follow along or just use that as your supplement to circle back. So without further ado, what we want to do is bring to light this very technicolor handout. And as mentioned, we want to charge you with using this handout as a tool, not only to guide your practices, but to help guide your patients and their families' choices as well. And we're going to do a little bit of a walk around the hexagon here. And I really want to foot stomp that we are absolutely in the middle of not just one, but two pandemics. We're in the middle of an infectious disease pandemic that is COVID, but we are also in the middle of a chronic disease pandemic that is single-handedly exacerbating the infectious disease pandemic that we are in as well. So we're really in a high risk. People think high risk is just obesity or diagnosed with cardiac disease. But I really want to foot stomp that, as Dr. Huynh had mentioned, that it's really everybody who's consuming the standard American diet and what that sets you up for from the standpoint of biological and cellular susceptibility, that is also a component of high risk. Next slide, please. So really, this is the top left portion of our hexagon, and we're going to do a little bit of a walk around here. So of course, we want to bring to light that CHAMP has a fantastic component that educates more, which is called the Operation Supplement Safety. And it's a resource that they have that basically cross-checks supplements, validity, claims for what actually exists in those supplements. So definitely make sure to check that out. And when we speak about COVID-specific supplementation, these are things that we want to foot stomp that this is stuff that you can extract, we recommend, from food first. So in addition to augmenting and fine-tuning food choice that we'll walk around that hexagon here shortly, we want to look at highlighted components. So zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, ionophores, quercetin, curcumin, things that you can get from natural sources, but also here are recommendations from Dr. Huynh and Dr. Chris Edens put this out as well as a bit of an augmentation. So this is absolutely individual specific as well. So certainly consult with your medical team before just jumping right in and figure out where you will land appropriately on the spectrum, but understand that these are some of the components that we like to highlight. So as we walk around this hexagon, we're going to shift gears into the top section, which is whole food plant-based. And if that's a little bit of a foreshadowing of what do these professional medical institutions have in common? Well, the consensus is here and it's very clear. And it's even being shown via USDA and HHS's revamp of the dietary guidelines and the advisory committee, where, you know, it's not our opinion in this space. This is something that we are really putting out there because what we are really after in this dialogue is to figure out how we can fine-tune components of our diet that Dr. Huynh had mentioned prior and how we can build up parts of it that are lacking. And that being said, what we have showcased on this slide is an entire country's food guide, top left, which is Canada, as well as Harvard's Healthy Plate. And what does it look like to you? Well, it looks like we should be eating a lot more plants, right? And sadly, what it really looks like in real time is about 62% of the standard American diet is comprised of processed foods. About a quarter of that is animal products and dairy. And then about 6% of the American diet, and even less, is snapshotted for actual real whole food plants. And you'll see this is sort of a snapshot from Canada's most recently updated food guide. And they say it right smack dab in the bold in the middle. Choose protein foods that come from plants more often, eat plenty of vegetables and fruits, whole grains, and protein foods. Limit how much processed foods you're consuming. Drink water. Make that your drink of choice. And start reading food labels. And as we continue walking around the hexagon, what is America truly lacking? Dr. Huynh briefly touched on this, and it is fiber and high quality protein sources at that. So current fiber intakes are alarmingly low with really long-term implications for public health related conditions. So coronary heart disease, stroke, hypertension, GI disorders, and the continuum of metabolic dysfunctions, including prediabetes and diabetes type 2. And you know, what we're really wanting to correlate here is that the standard American diet yields standard American diseases. So the fact that only 3% of Americans are meeting the mark for daily intake for fiber, that is single-handedly setting us up for chronic disease and immunosusceptibility in this space. So why does fiber matter? Well, fiber delivers a ton of health benefits, from supporting weight loss, reducing cholesterol, blood sugar levels, lowering the risk of cardiovascular diseases like stroke, heart disease, preventing diabetes and prediabetes. It increases digestive and bowel health, and it fuels a healthy gut. And so what we hope to bring to light here is that we should really be eating between 30 and 40 grams of natural fiber every single day. And that's distilled from American Heart Association, FDA, daily recommended values. And really where most Americans are falling on the fiber consumption spectrum daily is between 10 to 15 grams. So a fraction of where they should really be consuming. And that leads us to, we've all heard of fiber optics and fiber optic vision. And in terms of PPN, we're going to get a little bit literal here. And we really need to get comfortable. Go ahead into the next slide, please. We're going to get literally, like having a medium-sized apple, that's 4 grams of fiber. Having a medium-sized banana, that's 3 grams of fiber. So what does fiber look like in our daily routine? There's tons of free apps out there like MyFitnessPal or MyPlate Calorie Counter or MyNet Diary to help quantify fiber in simple and familiarizable ways. And of course, once again, not endorsed by the DoD at all. These are just recommendations for free apps that are out there. And why fiber is so important as we continue our walk around the hexagon is because fiber that we eat feeds billions of bacteria in our gut. And keeping that gut biome happy, that's a way to make sure that not only are our intestines and our immune system remain in healthy working order, but gut microbes do much more than just make energy. They send messages, they regulate healthy gut mucus production against pathogens. So it really would behoove us to find a state that makes us healthy for the long term and not just interval blips. Next slide, please. Oh, this is perfect, actually. Sorry, go back one. Perfect. So when we are in a shortfall for fiber, we enter a state that's called dysbiosis or gut dysbiosis. And that is what happens when your GI tract is essentially out of whack, or when we're consuming the standard American diet. And then our immune function becomes compromised as a result. You've probably heard of leaky gut syndrome, or what we really call dysregulated absorption. And the intestinal microbiome plays a huge role in modulating chronic disease risks. So inflammatory bowel disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, etc. And this slide specifically shows the connection between gut health and mental health diagnoses such as anxiety or depression and stress. And it shows that not only is the gut linked to immunoregulatory pathways, think cytokines, but also the neuroendocrine pathway, so HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. There is absolutely a link between what's going on in your gut and how your body is able to process and regulate inflammation and a health status. Next slide. So not only has it been shown that consumption of particular types of food produce predictable shifts in existing human bacterial milieu, if you will, but these microbial metabolites are providing epigenetic activators and gene expression components that influence disease, such as cancer and disease risk just in general. And this has huge implications for human health and optimization. So what that leads us to is this right out of the Journal of Translational Medicine, our microbiome modulates our disease risk, and our diet modulates our microbiome. So use your food choice as a therapeutic preventive modality for health maintenance. And this shows basically short-chain fatty acids, gut barriers, T regulatory cells, and decreasing inflammation with particular types of food components that are consumed, and whether they're predominantly plant-based or animal-derived, etc. Next slide. And this is from that same publication as well, that shows the impact of standard American diet and suboptimal food choice and the intestinal microbiota and cardiometabolic disease. And this here specifically is showcasing cardiovascular disease, diabetes type 2, and it shows that based on what we're producing in our guts, which is our home for our immune system, we're either going to be building inflammation or hindering it. So when we are eating the standard American diet and suffering from standard American diseases, inflammation becomes our baseline state, and it's a chronic smoldering of the undercurrent of our biocellular makeup. And it's important to understand that inflammation is the foundation that chronic degenerative disease thrives on. Inflammation creates a cellular environment that is rife for disease to manifest, from cellular misregulation and degradation to DNA damage. Oxidative stress, as we know, has been linked to heart disease, cancer, arthritis, immunodeficiency, and tons of other chronic issues. So this is a list, and this will be available to you all too, of the most highly antioxidizing foods, which is the next node of the hexagon that we're going to walk around. And it's predominantly vegetable matter that you see listed at the very top. So tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, peppers, you name it. Next slide. We're really trying to find ways to encourage people to eat food that's deep and dark in pigment, because when you're eating those deep, dark pigments, you're maximizing how much phytonutrient, AKA antioxidant capacity, you are taking in every single day. So it does matter whether or not you choose that red pepper versus that green pepper, which has loads more beta carotene and vitamin A, and even more so than a yellow pepper. So the red pepper is the unofficial champion of the bell pepper in the color spectrum. So where we land now is on the anti-inflammatory side of the house, and antioxidants help dampen the manifestation of inflammation. And so as we know, and as we mentioned, when you're able to tamper how much inflammation is going on in the system, you're able to minimize how much either sequelae are coming from chronic disease that's already been established, or minimize how much susceptibility you have to chronic disease in general. And this is becoming ever so salient in the context of inflammation and COVID. And we're seeing constant low-level immune system activation, which is a result of standard American diet consumption. And like I said, this is sort of the fertile ground for that lit match to fall, potentially causing worsened disease state and downstream side effects, which we've mentioned as a cytokine storm, which hits hard for COVID patients. Basically, think of it this way: COVID is hitting us where it hurts, and it's capitalizing on our chronic degenerative disease states. And this was out actually this month, sourcing that almost 50% of US adults are at increased risk for complications from COVID because of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, respiratory disease, hypertension, or cancer. And this slide in particular was put out by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, showcasing that, hey, within the military specifically, as Dr. Huynh mentioned, we are by no means exempt from the chronic medical issues that are going on in this country. And we need to shore that up. We need to maintain our national security, which lies in the health of our men and women in uniform. And we're looking at prediabetes, diabetes, overweight, obesity, chronic pain, and hypertension, which are chronic medical issues that are limiting our readiness, our ability to deploy, and our ability to maintain health in general as men and women in the service. So where this is relevant in the space of COVID-19, the key here, and the chart that you'll see on the left, is that keeping our baseline inflammation down is prime and what we're after, so that when the body fights off the virus and generates more inflammation, it's not going to overwhelm the body system. So the bluff here is basically, this is hard to do when there's so much chronic disease just smoldering at such a large percent of the American population. And this has been substantiated in the literature. Next slide. When we're looking at the Lancet that came out in May of this year, endothelial cell infection is being exacerbated in COVID infection. And we're looking at COVID as not just a, go ahead to the next slide, please. We're looking at COVID as not just a respiratory disease, but a vasculotropic virus. So what does that mean? It's going to the components of our blood vessels, and it's exacerbating cellular dysfunction on that level too. Once again, it's using our own de-optimized health status against us. It's compounding insult to injury, sort of adding salt to the proverbial wounds here. So we're looking at COVID as a respiratory infection and a vascular infection. And as the next slide shows, the acceleration of endothelial dysfunction, which is accelerated during chronic long-term disease, is being basically capitalized on in this space. So what does that mean from the standpoint of translating this information into action? Well, in a nutshell, we all remember this wonderful Skittles ad as we all grew up over the past several decades or so. And what we want to encourage you all to do is not to just taste the rainbow, but to eat the rainbow. And why is this relevant? Because you're getting maximized phytonutrient intake, you're getting that fiber component, you're eating real food, you're eating components that don't have an ingredient list. This is what your body will use to give you the best fighting chance for avoiding chronic disease and hopefully exacerbations for susceptibility for COVID. And that being said, we're going to go ahead and shift gears over to Dr. Stepanenko, who's going to talk about personal protective lifestyle.
Thank you, Dr. Stiegmann. All right. Before I roll into my walk around the hexagon for PPL, I want to share a personal story and the relevance of why this was important to me and really what's been my driving force behind my engagement with this task force resilience. Once again, by all means, get your hands on the handout. It's a product of our kind of melding of the minds and expertise and awareness of what the literature supports. This is all evidence-based recommendations and action-oriented recommendations. So for me, I was on. So I'm an outpatient clinician, family physician, and caring for a primarily mix of active duty personnel, their immediate family members, but also veterans. And I had a large portion, about 60% of elderly, geriatric, as well as chronic pain patients. So a lot of comorbid conditions there. And for me, my patients wanted more. They were making all fear-based decisions, and I was tired of telling them only enough about PPE, social distancing, and testing, quarantine, and isolation. They needed something else. They needed to feel more empowered. I wanted them to feel like they have some locus of control. This helped fill that gap. So for me in the outpatient setting, this filled that gap. But separately, I was deployed for COVID response, Operation Gotham, up to New York, Manhattan, spent about 2 weeks running sick call for the care teams and contributing to sick call for the care teams that were up there at the Javits Center. And then after that, I was a month and a half in New Jersey over in Atlantic City, where we converted a local convention center to a field hospital. And once again, my team of 9, small team, was in charge of sick call for those providing direct care to COVID positive patients. I needed my team to be on point. I needed my team to be unbreakable. And I said, how do I relate to them what they can do to support their immune system to make sure that even if they did get exposed, saying we're going to a hotspot, we're caring for those who are caring for COVID positive, exposure is inevitable. So how do I build their immune system and make them unbreakable so that they bounce back even if they do get exposed? And this filled that gap for me, PPN and PPL. So for me, I pushed that information to them and made sure they were drinking water, taking a few supplements, making smarter food choices, and getting their sleep. And you'll see sleep becomes a critical part. So we'll roll right into it. And my walk around the hexagon is going to start with sleep. Now, in 2017, RAND put out a study where they shared their findings of sleep in the military and the prevalence of sleep dysfunction and sleep disorders in the military population. So in the active duty population, about 85% had some version of a sleep disorder. Obstructive sleep apnea and sleep apnea was a big one. Insomnia was another big one. What was really surprising was the mean sleep duration and how prevalent it was to get less than 5 hours of sleep nightly. Now, sometimes this is command-driven and mission-driven, but sometimes this is just military lifestyle and having young adults around each other and giving them access to make their own decisions. Sometimes they may not understand the importance of sleep and its impact on body physiology, immune system, and performance and recovery. So what's interesting is that, okay, almost 50%, a little more than 40%, we're getting less than 5 hours of sleep per night. If you look to the right, UCSF has an infographic showing that less than 5 hours of sleep per night almost triples your risk of getting the common cold virus when you're exposed. So your immune system is at a lower level of protection just by getting that less than 5 hours of sleep per night. Up on the top right, baseline levels of inflammation when provoked with some version of a threat. Our innate immune system, specifically the monocytes, were expressing more inflammatory milieu. So we can roll on to the next slide. Now, we're aware melatonin has its relationship to sleep and its diurnal rhythm, and it increases at night to help us get to sleep. But what you may not know is the other roles that melatonin plays in the body, and that's antioxidant activity, anti-inflammatory activity, even some chelation activity. But this paper just highlights that it underpromises and overdelivers, and it's critically important to our ability to maintain healthy physiology and metabolism. Next slide. So in Nature Reviews on the right, in Nature Reviews in December 2018, there was a series of papers that, and the entire issue focused on biorhythms and circadian rhythms around endocrinology and metabolism, and being aware that your body requires routine and rhythm. So healthy physiology and metabolism requires routine and rhythm. And that's one of our strong recommendations and foot stomps on the PPL recommendations is try to maintain a consistent sleep-wake cycle. And for those that are on off shifts and overnight shifts, it's extremely difficult. So healthcare workers are innately a little bit higher risk of getting sleep deprivation chronically, and shifting sleep-wake cycles is a difficult challenge to navigate, but it's not impossible. Next slide. So stress, we know psychological stress, physiological stress, they can all contribute to inflammation, oxidative stress, and endothelial dysfunction, which we said that COVID exploits these areas of physiologic fragility. And I like that term, but in particular, psychological stressors, definitely, you can see the pathways here where they contribute to increase in baseline levels of inflammation, oxidative stress, and endothelial dysfunction. Next slide. So COVID-19 then being an acute on chronic issue. So we get exposed to the virus, it has its entrance through the respiratory pathways, it disables the ACE2 enzyme activity where it gains entrance, but then it's vasculotropic as well. So now you have increased levels and activity for endothelial dysfunction, oxidative stress, and inflammation. So really, you are, Dr. Stiegmann already demonstrated in that graph where she showed baseline level of inflammation getting you closer to that fatality threshold. So it's an acute on chronic condition. Next slide. So how do we combat that? We've got plenty of evidence and bodies of evidence that are supporting stress management and stress management tactics, techniques, cognitive behavioral therapies, but then there's tech. And with our population that we're serving, active duty families and soldiers, they may care to utilize those tech options more so. So maybe rather than journaling or meditation, they might be willing to engage, download an app, Headspace, try it out for free, or do something like an Oura Ring, Whoop device, Garmin device, some of your wearable tech that can give you some biomarkers of how stressed your body is. Back one slide, please. So if you can go back to the stress, thank you. So knowing your stress burden, you can use some wearable tech for that. So basically monitoring something like a daily resting heart rate or heart rate variability. And there are heart rate variability tools. On the bottom right, you have HeartMath. HeartMath has some evidence in its ability to help people manage and regulate stress and lower stress with regular use of heart rate variability. And then once you realize what helps you reduce stress, you can then even do it without the biofeedback, knowing that you have a tool in the toolbox. This works for me. This reduces my stress when I do this. Next slide. Exercise. We're aware that exercise can can help balance and regulate mood, emotional state, increase some of the feel-good hormones, and specifically endorphins, but even the endocannabinoid system. We know it can improve and boost the immune system reactivity to fight off viral diseases. So really, we know exercise is extremely important, but it's also important for brain health. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, you can consider it miracle grow for the brain, can help with consolidating memory pathways, can help with supporting your neuroglia, can help with supporting memory and cognitive function. So yes, it has a wide range of benefits, but it's not only the body health, it's brain health. Next slide. So one other area of deep dive, this was an interesting paper around the COVID-19 timeframe. We're saying, okay, well, what might mediate or moderate some of the protective benefit that exercise would have? And interestingly, cardiovascular exercise increases an extracellular protein and an extracellular enzyme called extracellular superoxide dismutase. And this directly supports antioxidant buffering capability and antioxidant activity in the body, thereby protecting organs, critically important organs being the lungs, the heart, the kidney, the liver. And we know that with the microangiopathy and the microischemic areas in the microemboli, you want to do anything possible and everything possible to protect these organs, especially in the COVID-19 setting. So the recommendations for physical activity and exercise, we landed on saying, okay, American Heart Association already has strong recommendations on this. And for adults, it's at least 5 days a week of 30 minutes or more, and a total of about 150 minutes. And that's moderate intensity aerobic activity. So you can gauge intensity of activity just by your ability to breathe during the activity. If you're having to breathe at a higher rate than if you were just strolling along, you should not be able to belt out a full opera song or carry out I was going to jokingly say a Mariah Carey song or something where you have to really carry a tune, but you should be able to have a conversation. So you can have a conversation, but you can't belt out a full song and just continuously sing during the activity. That's moderate intensity. Now, at least 3 days a week of vigorous intensity physical activity, that would be not really being able to carry a full-on conversation, definitely not able to carry on a tune and sing a complete song. And that would be at least 3 days a week, 25 minutes of that. But don't forget to include some strength training. We know it's good for bone density. We know it's good for longevity. And muscle mass definitely has been shown to correlate with longevity recently, and also reduce risks of falls and injuries related to that. For kids, on the right, American Heart Association recommends every day, at least an hour of some type of moderate to vigorous exercise or activity. However, the one caveat for exercise is that too much can also be detrimental, and too much physiologic stress can actually impair immune system function. So the top right graph shows the risk of respiratory infection with the increasing amounts and intensity of exercise. So once again, resting heart rate variability, knowing your stress burden, you can use that to gauge whether you need to go train for the marathon today or whether you should maybe do some more restorative yoga, meditation, or swimming. Next slide. So we know social isolation changes a wide variety of metabolic and immune system functions in the body, and recent evidence has been building on that. We know that it changes your transcriptome or your metabolome, the way your genetics are read. That was some really interesting bodies of work. I didn't reference it here, but that's out there and it exists. Specifically talking about social connection and connectivity. Once again, we're keeping this action-oriented. For people to feel connected to community and to establish and foster a sense of community and connection, I want to give you a working definition here. If we define community as a group of individuals bound together by gifts, stories, and experiences, then we know how to build community and we know how to increase connectedness, share more gifts, stories, and experiences. Next slide. Laughter is truly one of the best medicines. So think about maybe one of your favorite stand-up comedians, and how much you laughed at it, you know, got your facial muscles sore just from enjoying watching it. What you were doing was increasing your immune system activity. We've got some biomarkers of innate immune system activity, referred to as NK cell activity. Those go up with how funny you truly find something. So this was one study just showing that immune system biomarkers, immune system activity, especially innate immune system activity, which is critically important for COVID-19, goes up with laughter. And we've got an infographic off to the right as well. Next slide. I love this picture, and I just want to challenge you. This is a fun activity I do when I show this slide, is try and pick out which person you think is watching the cat video. Cat videos in general, you know, wherever you see them, it's just they're so cute, and they really know how to make you laugh. There was actually a social experiment way back in the day. I was listening to NPR. They were talking about one researcher had convinced the television broadcast system to play one channel of just continuous cat videos and pet videos. And it was such a stress relieving activity, but no one was funding it continuously. So it ended up dropping off. That's sad. Next slide. All right. We have one study here, really interesting, where people spent 2 days out in nature, and they got baseline levels of NK cell activity and inflammation before sending these individuals to go spend time in nature. And they took the same serum labs and looked at the levels of NK cell activity and inflammation. And over the course of 2 days, the NK cell activity went up. So innate immune system activity went up and inflammation went down. And what's interesting is that 1 week out and even 1 month out from those 2 days in nature, those biomarkers were still in the net positive range and significantly better than baseline. So just 2 days out in nature, which is a weekend, 2 days out in nature will reduce inflammation and increase in NK cell and immune system activity. And it's a sustained benefit. Next slide. So up near Walter Reed and at the USU campus, you guys have something I believe called the Greenway or the Green Path. Choose that bit more often. Being out in nature has been shown to, once again, reduce inflammation and improve immune system activity. We've got studies to support that. Even looking at pictures, similar to this one, where the point of focus is very far away, and it's a green space and green scenery. Even art and pictures like that displayed in a space and in a room can reduce the stress of the individual in that room. Next slide. So appreciate nature wherever you can, wherever you are, even if it's just getting to a rooftop or an outdoor area and watching the sunset, maybe even watching it rise. Don't forget to stop and appreciate nature and just be mindfully present in nature. That's really the gist of it. Next slide. So for this, an adaptable mindset, a resilient mindset, being mindfully aware of what you have control over and what you don't becomes important. Important in the amount of stress that you derive from that stimulus. Now, Viktor Frankl, I'll highlight his quote here to the right. Between stimulus and response, there is this space. In that space lies our power to choose. In that choice lies our growth and freedom. Thank you, Viktor Frankl. Holocaust survivor, in case you guys haven't heard of that. Fantastic book. I recommend to read. Next slide. So with regards to adaptable mindset and maintaining a resilient mindset, we want to be aware of the population that we serve, in that it's millennials, it's Gen Xers, it's Gen YZ. I mean, it's the whole gamut. And how do we connect to those that are tech savvy and that may not want to read an article? Sometimes YouTube videos is something that I'll actually use with care for my patients. I'll ask them to pull out their cell phone, and if they've got service, I'll ask them to look up a key term, and we'll scroll through and find the videos that I'd like for them to watch. They'll mark it, and they'll either watch it as soon as they leave or later on and report back to me next time I see them. For this one, Simon Sinek has a fantastic fantastic recording available saying these are not unprecedented times, that in order to be resilient, he explains his infinite mindset, and that's being adaptable. And an example is one of the quote here: the opportunity is what will we be, not how do we preserve what we had. Being willing to change to meet the new demand in the new climate, in the new environment. Next slide. So for my young soldiers, I have a difficult time relaying to them mindfulness, and it becomes a bit too squishy of a term for them. So for them, almost guarantee they know who Conor McGregor is, and they may identify with him a little more closely. This video is a fantastic way of helping young active duty population guy understand mindfulness in a different way of explanation. So a stoic mindset, at the heart of stoicism is mindfulness and your ability to choose how you respond to stimuli. And this video demonstrates all of the traits and characteristics in what he says and does, and has little clippets of it. So one thing I'll highlight, one quote from him, he says, "This is the fight business. I've been on the end of many defeats in my life, and I've rose back. I will not shy away from it. I will not make excuses for it. I will assess it and come back." Once again, fantastic video. Just consider sharing links and YouTube videos. So consider your audience. Now we'll kind of finish up here saying that this is the communication tool that we're trying to share links with and make sure you guys get connected to. This is version 1 of our PPN and PPL handout. It's meant to be an education tool. It's meant to be a memory tool for those that get this exposure, but then it can also be a prescriptive tool and used with your patients. But don't forget, focus on the one thing. Focus on the next thing. Focus on starting in an area where they need some assistance with, but where they're willing to start. Maybe it's an area where they've been good at a specific healthy behavior before, and then let's figure out how to get you back to there. That would be maybe one good place to start. Next slide. And the PPL side of it is what I just gave you the walk through on. There will be a version 2 coming out after we really meld minds with the CHAMP team and their subject matter experts. And with that, you can expect an additional link to a version 2 soon to come. Next slide. So Dr. Stiegmann mentioned it earlier on, is that this information can be helpful for anyone. This can be helpful for average American, the average soldier, each of their family members, to empower them, to let them know there are things in their control. And there is a locus of control. You can make sure you're hitting this checklist of healthy behaviors. PPN and PPL just give some guidance on it. But for those that are at higher health risks within our panels and our population, there are ways of identifying those at high health risk and those who are high utilizers with those known chronic disease conditions that already have comorbid conditions setting them up for higher risk. Specifically, we have population management tools, data management tools, and a suite of metrics called adjusted clinical groups, ACG metrics. They can help you identify your high health risk and your high utilizer population. But then how do you engage them? And we've been incorporating virtual visits, but there's other opportunities to provide virtual care that can then deliver PPN and PPL. So this is just one example of a system and a way of engaging high-risk population patients virtually to deliver meaningful information and value. But don't forget, in order to iterate and improve with rapidity, the term learning health system is something I want to make sure you get exposed to here. It's care delivery paired with data generation, so you create lean learning loops. And once again, the focus is on rapid cycle innovation. How do you inform innovation? Next slide.
So what we're seeing with COVID is one virus, one infection, but multiple diseases. 45% have no symptoms, and then yet we're seeing 171,000 deaths in the United States. So it turns out it's really us Like we are the one that manifest the disease. So it could be no symptoms all the way to severe complications. And I highly encourage you to read this article that talks about that there are host factors and things that perhaps are modifiable. I want to go back for DOD. I serve as the Deputy Chief of Preventive Medicine for the Air Force Surgeon General. That in 2006, we published the Pandemic Influenza Plan for DOD. I know it's been updated under NORTHCOM, but what we did not account for when we planned was host vulnerability. Our planning assumption is that we would have a fit and ready force. But currently, we are seeing overweight and obesity anywhere from 60 to 70%. Cardiovascular risk, at least 18% of active duty members at least have one risk factor for coronary artery disease. Hypertension, 17%. Widespread nutritional deficit, as well as a very sleep-deprived force. So my question is, are we truly fit and ready to fight this pandemic? I spent a lot of time thinking about COVID. And part of that thinking, I go back to when I did my Master of Public Health at USU, and I learned about Jon Snow. And Jon Snow here is not the same as in the character in the Game of Thrones. It's Jon Snow is the father of epidemiology. And how he became the father of epidemiology was back in 1854. There was a cholera outbreak in London, and he created this map, we call the spot map, where he put a dot for every case. And what he noticed was the cases was around a particular well in London on Broad Street. And what he did was, well, he think maybe it's from the well, and he removed the pump handle to that well that was contaminated with cholera, and the outbreak went away. So in terms of COVID, do we have a pump handle? And I think that pump handle is the host, is us. You know, in terms of epidemiology and the science of infection and how we get infected, there's a triad. We call it the epi-triad: the host, the agent, and the environment. The agent has been the same: environment, physical distancing perhaps, but in this pandemic, we're both the host and we're the vector. So the health and resilience of our population becomes so critical. And the good news is that up to 45% may have it and have no symptom. That's really good news if that's really the case. But at the same time, 45% may be at risk for severe complications. I know there are genetic issues, there are genetic variants, there are biology. We don't know why men are impacted by this more than women, but there's certainly a huge part that we all can do, because they're all modifiable risk factors that we can reverse. So total force fitness was something the Department of Defense put together, signed by the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff back in 2011. And in it states right up front, the most valuable resource in our military is our people. And to protect our people, we need to introduce and embrace, and for all leaders at all levels, to have total force fitness at the center. So it consists of 8 domains. Medical and dental is only 1 at 8. There's physical, nutritional, psychological, social, spiritual, environmental, and financial. And total force fitness is designed to keep service members resilient, flourishing throughout our environment, from at home to deployment. And this is a slide we want to summarize with. So currently, for primary prevention, we are doing PPE, or mask and shield, gloves, physical distancing, quarantine, and testing. We want to introduce, let's build resilience throughout this pandemic. Let's put total force fitness right in the center with PPN and PPL. And what about looking at our high-risk populations? Healthcare workers, frontline, those with significant risk factor for complications. Should we be checking their vitamin D 25 hydroxy level? Should we optimize their vitamin D? Should we suggest a multivitamin with zinc, because knowing that only 1 in 10 Americans actually eat the vegetables, actually eat more of those. But there was also this period between a positive COVID test and a period of 10 to 14 days. And this chart up here came out of the Lancet. If you look at it, the chart at the top show those who survive, symptoms, and those who survive, and the bottom are non-survivors. And what you notice that the symptoms are exactly the same. They're exactly the same up to about 10 days. And the non-survivors will crash and they would need to go into ICU and be intubated and emergency care. And flatten the curve for ICU and hospital preparedness. We put the weighted effort and being prepared to take care of the really sick. But what about this space in the middle? Right now, as a primary care doc, the guidance for me is just to isolate, sure my patient stay isolated so they don't infect other. I'm supposed to mainly observe and call them, and that's it. I'm like, what about introducing zinc? Because zinc has been shown to stop viruses from replicating. And a study from Finland 2010 showed that zinc is able to block SARS-CoV-1, which is SARS-CoV-2 cousin, from replicating. Introducing that with a zinc ionophore that can bring zinc into the cell. It could be quercetin, which is a plant flavonoid, EGCG found in green tea, or chloroquine. Vitamin C and vitamin D being critical. The reason I introduce this here is that may have a role in secondary and tertiary prevention. Secondary prevention is when you're protecting those who may be infected to prevent them from getting sick, you know. And tertiary is if they're already sick, they're tested positive, or there's something we can do besides just isolate, observe, and monitor to prevent them from being part of this 20%. And this is even more important now than ever, because we're seeing, this is a study published in JAMA out of Italy, and it turns out there's a large number of patients who are experiencing post-COVID syndrome. We're calling them the long haulers, where 87% of patients after COVID, and this could be anywhere from mild, moderate to severe, experience at least one symptom. 3 or more have 55% of either fatigue, difficulty breathing, pain, cough, and so on. And 44% saying they have worsened quality of life after COVID. So flatten the curve is not just about prevention and containment, it's also about building resilience so that if we are infected, we're not part of that 20%. We will either be asymptomatic or have mild symptoms. So in summary, this is a call to action for all of you to help us win this war. This pandemic is COVID plus the pandemic of chronic diseases that we're seeing. Because it's one virus, multiple variation in disease, and really our diet, our microbiome, our lifestyle do shape immunity and outcome. Force resilience is really critical for our national security. For healthcare workers out there, we are considered the war fighters. So we ourselves have to walk the talk. We need to get ourselves healthy and be as resilient as we can. We need to make total force fitness within the DoD a priority. As a clinician, a primary care clinician, I'm seeing these gaps that I need help with. How do we do better outpatient management so that our patients don't end up in the hospital? I was trained family practice and preventive medicine in the military, and I was taught by my mentors that hospitalization is a failure of primary care. I don't want to fail our patients. So what about emergency use authorization of some supplements for prevention? And I think about this a lot in conversation with colleagues. For COVID patients, do we do more harm giving them zinc ionophore, vitamin D, and vitamin C for 10 and 14 days? Or do we just do nothing and observe and monitor? I'm choosing to offer them something rather than just observe and monitor. So resilience is your mask, your PPE, PPN, PPL. In the military, it's also about human security. And for our members, their security is our national security. We have additional resources and information to share with you.
And as Dr. Doyster had mentioned in the very beginning, and as we close up the talk, we're going to give you guys a couple of definitions and a couple of resources to access. As was mentioned, so lifestyle medicine is a big focal point for the foundation for the content that we've been discussing today. And the definition of lifestyle medicine is using a whole food, plant predominant dietary lifestyle, regular physical activity, restorative sleep, stress management, avoidance of risky substances, and positive social connection as primary therapeutic modalities for treatment and reversal of chronic disease. You can find more information, tons of free resources. They've got grants, scholarships, webinars, handouts for every level of education and every flavor of healthcare professional. lifestylemedicine.org/medicine. And as Dr. Doyster had mentioned, we're really trying to spin up the educational component within the military for lifestyle medicine for residencies in particular. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So feel free to check them out. As mentioned, lifestylemedicine.org. They also, on the next slide, they're very sensitive to the demands and the needs of the military, so the DoD and the VA. And they've got some fantastic offers for education and for membership, et cetera. Next slide.
All right, I'll jump in to give us some working definitions and understanding of functional medicine here. So the Institute of Functional Medicine is one of the forefront runners for education in this area of medicine. So I'll give you their definition, but then I'll give you the definition that we've landed on for the DoD, VA, birds of a feather, military functional medicine community. So on the IFM website, which is ifm.org, you'll see that picture in a minute. Functional medicine is an individualized, patient-centered, science-based approach that empowers patients and practitioners to work together to address underlying causes of disease and promote optimal wellness. That's the goal, optimal wellness. It requires a detailed understanding of each patient's genetic, biochemical, and lifestyle factors, and leverages data to direct personalized treatment plans that lead to improved patient outcomes. Next slide. So in the DoD specifically, there's one training pathway that IFM has partnered with the National Capital Region Pain Initiative up at Walter Reed, headed by Chris Spivak and his program manager, Amy Osick. Quick shout out to them. Milan and myself are faculty educators with their training pathway. Annually, we put through about 30 healthcare practitioners and 30 care team leaders. So we're up to about 90 currently. And the way we respond to the question of what is functional medicine is it is a person-oriented medical approach rather than a problem-oriented medical approach. So rather than labeling a collection of symptoms and clinical findings with a diagnosis and starting with the problem, we are striving to understand a person in context over time and to deliver personalized lifestyle and integrative medicine interventions that address root cause dysfunction. So really it's just a way to align existing resources and services and to empower your patient to get them to connect that what they do, think, and eat matters, and what they do, think, and eat changes the way their body functions to reverse the disease conditions and to improve performance and wellness. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of their landing page. There are educational training pathways. There's a basic introduction course, a 5-dayer that me personally, I did PTDY while I was in residency training to do this. And they have advanced practice modules that you can do through the IFM alone. However, that introductory course is paid for through TDY funding and DoD funding through that National Capital Region Pain Initiative. So reach out to us afterwards. We'll share some contact information afterwards. And the IFM has been very supportive of a DoD VA working group that has been meeting annually at the annual conference for IFM. Next slide.
I want to let you know that DoD has resources that promote PPN and PPL. There are apps as well as through Military One Source. There's free health coaching for active duty, reserve, and their family members. And CHAM, host HPRC, encourage you to sign up for the newsletter. Incredible resources on nutrition and lifestyle and how to be resilient throughout this pandemic and beyond. And here are our contact info. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, you need any materials, any support. We have a whole team of task force resilience behind us. I want to end before we get to the Q&A, just to come back for those who are serving service members, military members and their families. We're here for them, and during a pandemic, we can think outside our usual box. In the military, it's not enough just to treat the disease, for sure. So are there more we can do to ensure resilience? Total force fitness, PPN, PPL. But what if when they have a positive test, that period between having a positive test and waiting 10 to 14 days to see if you need to go to the hospital is really scary for our patients? Should we be looking at perhaps other supplements like zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C? What else can we do? With that, I want to conclude, and we're ready to take any questions you may have.
First, I wanted to thank you all for a really most wonderful presentation. There have been some very interesting comments. And does anybody have questions? Everybody seems to be a little silent right now. This is Patty, and I'd like to say that one of the things that I'd like to see is maybe also include magnesium in your recommendations. We're getting more and more information on how people are consuming sufficient magnesium, and it's such an important mineral that works really hand in hand with some of the other recommendations that have been made.
Yeah. This is Brian Stepanenko. I've been including magnesium in the talking points. Like you said, even foods that used to be high in magnesium may not have the same sources of magnesium these days. So that multivitamin component that contains zinc may also contain magnesium to hit the mark and just ensure that we have adequate levels. Would you mind if I highlight a couple of comments? Like you mentioned, the audience kind of brought up some good points along the way.
Please, let me just make another comment. You mentioned quercetin. I think it's really important. One of the comments talked about apples and onions. We get quercetin from apples and onions, and so that should go on your presentation in parentheses. Apples and onions. Okay,
yeah.
turning it over to you, Brian.
That was definitely like one of the first two I was going to highlight, and that was an excellent comment. It was, yes, apples, onions, capers is another one, but you can find lists that contain food sources for just about anything. Zinc, you'll be surprised at the foods that you're probably already eating or eat regularly. The lifestyle medicine evidence base is showing that we're creatures of habit. As much as we think we have a highly diverse selection of foods, is that we tend to resort to several mainstay food options. So I'm sure that there's in those lists of zinc containing foods, magnesium containing foods, vitamin D containing foods, there's a lot of things that you eat already that you would just simply increase the frequency of it in the setting of COVID. So another gentleman mentioned that some literature is showing projections of COVID being an issue for as long as 4 to 5 years out, at least at this level of alarm or sensitivity to its existence in our communities. So he was saying that he thinks this content and this material will increase in importance and increase in reach. Definitely agree. If you guys have any comments, either, other points of view about that, I definitely agree with that one.
Brian, there's one question here. It says, could you provide more information on funding available for the functional medicine classes?
Well, there's a few options. So one, if you were to go through the IFM non-DoD pathway, there are student discounts, even resident discounts available, and there are some scholarships to fund some of the training programs that IFM offers, and that can either be through IFM directly through their website, and as you go to sign up, they'll have contact information, and you can reach out there to their team to ask them what options exist. But also the Integrative Medicine for the Underserved, im4us.com. has options to provide scholarships for some of the training for functional medicine. You just basically need to send in a few paragraphs of why military population or the population that you serve is an underserved population that would benefit from your functional medicine training. Separate from that, the DoD pathway, National Capital Region Pain Initiative, and Amy Osick, you can find her on the Global Outlook. OSIK, first name Amy, AMY. She's a point of contact for that. And they take applications. I think they open up applications around October, November. And that's for the subsequent year, March or April. And it's a two-phase training pathway. Phase 1 is like 5 days, and phase 2 is a 2-day case-based learning to reinforce what was learned.
And this is Dr. Stiegmann. A second thought on that, really just from a standpoint of growing the lifestyle medicine educational pathway right alongside functional medicine, is that there's definitely a big push for educating military training pipelines too. So keep your eyes peeled for new opportunities coming up very soon from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and military residencies.
And I want to foot stomp and emphasize that functional medicine is just an operating system, and really what you deliver is lifestyle medicine that just addresses root cause dysfunction. So those who practice functional medicine practice lifestyle medicine, and we're passionately in support of it, and we always pursue and seek opportunities to learn more about lifestyle medicine, integrative medicine modalities. Food as medicine, exercise as medicine is 100% the flag that we fly.
So to the three of you, there's another question that came in. What are some steps individuals who are deployed can take when adequate nutrition is only MREs? So who wants to take that one on?
Yeah, I think initially you eat the MRE and demand it. I think folks can demand healthier food choices. Unfortunately, fast food tend to be deployed with our military bases overseas have great access to task force and commander. Their unintended morale boosting is to deploy the fast food with them. So I think getting the word out that we want the fresh vegetables and fruits.
So Stepanenko here, I had a handout about 30 healthful habits in the military operational environment, and some of the recommendations spanned deployed setting. So hydration and daily bowel movements become critically important when you're in areas that we deploy you to that may have some environmental toxin exposure, airborne hazards that you might be exposed to, and MREs themselves are devoid of fiber. So things like increasing fiber or taking fiber supplements, even in the single use, tear, pour powder, mix with water versions, would be extremely helpful. You want to ensure your elimination pathways are working well. So add extra fiber, supplemental fiber, taking that in whatever way that packs into your gear. Also, vitamin D, critically important. We tend to be covered from head to toe, and even though you're out in sun-exposed areas, you're covered from head to toe, and it's part of our PPE that we wear. So I talked about fiber, hydration, daily bowel movements, really being some goals. I would say a probiotic. Probiotic would also be an opportunity to improve and protect your gut function while you're on antimalarials, doxycycline, for 6 to 9 months at a time, however long you're on antibiotics. There's bodies of evidence that show that we can minimize gut disruption with taking probiotics simultaneous to antibiotics, and perhaps for a 2-week time frame following the antibiotic course. So those that come back from deployments with some gut dysfunction, we've just created a microbiome disrupting event. So why not pair a microbiome disrupting event with a microbiome supporting and reinforcing probiotic?
And for some historical context, because of typically religious practices, so halal and kosher, there are actually a handful of vegetarian MREs, such as tortellini, pasta marinara, and spicy vegetarian chili. However, paying attention to how much fiber is actually really in those, and those are pretty heavy dairy laden regardless. So we'll give credit where credit is due. However, there's certainly room for improvement across the board, per Dr. Stepanenko's input, and same with Dr. Huynh. So just for some interesting history.
Dr. Huynh provided an interesting piece of history about MREs and the reason behind why they were low fiber, low residue. They didn't want soldiers having bowel movements and leaving evidence of men and personnel in the area, especially that the enemy can detect. So the goal was not to allow you to, not to have you having regular bowel movements. It really, and no surprise that when you eat the low residue diet, low fiber diet, that guys get stopped up. That was the intent. Really interesting.
So I think we also have to realize that for an MRE that
I think you hopped off.
agrees for at least 2 weeks. So that's an issue that's very difficult to put fresh fruits and vegetables in MREs if they have to be stored for 2 years over.
Yeah, that too.
So I know there's a number of other questions. We're coming up towards the end, and I didn't know whether each one of you just had a couple last little words of wisdom for healthcare providers who don't necessarily have all these resources, maybe just a little pearl for the providers out there. So Brian, you go first, and then we'll have Maylin and then Reagan. Thank you.
Roger, thank you. So I would say focus on the one thing, and getting to the one thing that is aligned with the patient's beliefs, values, and priorities, and is also aligned with what you see as glaringly important for them to do, can be extremely challenging. But focusing on becoming good at navigating that discussion of figuring out the one thing, but then also how do you support them leaving the room to do and enact that one thing? How can you leverage your team to support them? How can you line up your subsequent encounters, maybe a virtual encounter at 1 week, 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks out, utilizing those virtual encounters and those telephone visits and in-person visits, utilizing your support network of Army Wellness Center or your human performance resources or your holistic health and fitness team, H2F. I know that's being pushed out on the Army end. So I'm sure there's other resources and services that are around you, but think in terms of community, lifestyle, integrative, and nutrition resources. What do you have around you? Active duty pathways, VA pathways, even in the local civilian network, community, lifestyle, integrative, and nutrition interventions. Use handouts. Find content that you're comfortable with, and bring that out and get comfortable with speaking about those handouts. That's it. I'll step back. I think that was several points.
Yeah, so when the threat is a virus, we healthcare professionals are at the front line. So we have to take care of ourselves first, right? We have to make sure we get enough sleep, eat healthy, do our exercise, find joy, stress management. And I have to say, during this whole COVID, I made a point to get my 8 hours of sleep, something I've always sacrificed in the past. When I saw the study on natural killer cell, I'm going to boost my natural killer cell. And also studies show that we clinicians who practice a healthy lifestyle are more likely to share that with our patients. So I'm asking all of my colleagues to put your health first so that you can serve your patients and share this information with your patient. And thank you for all that you do. And thanks for being here.
Awesome. And just as a final closing thought, I will foot stomp, reach out to us. We are here as your infrastructure. So is CHAMP, so is the efforts from the task force. I'd like to reinforce, don't reinvent the wheel, rather customize your spokes, and find out how we can get you the content and the lines of effort that we are building foundationally. Actually, as of 2 days ago, the Lifestyle and Performance Medicine Working Group was approved at the headquarters level, being led by Colonel Valerie Castle. And we're super proud of that, and we want to bring that to every single sister service, anybody in affiliation with the military, VA, DOD, you name it. Please reach out to us. This is all about collaborating, and we want to help make this a smooth transition for providers in any flavor of healthcare, because that will hand over fist yield fantastic results for our patients, and that's what we're after. So thank you so much, Patty and Champ, for this fantastic opportunity today.
Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate it. And again, there's just some wonderful comments up there, and there's more room for dialogue and perhaps time for another seminar in the future. So thanks to everyone who participated. So take care. Bye-bye.
Thank
Stay
you.
healthy. Be
Thank
well.
you all for joining us. This presentation has been recorded. It will be made available on HPRC's YouTube page. If you registered with our organization through the Zoom link, we do have your email address. And if you're from USIS, we'll also send out information via email where you can find the recording and also all of the handouts that were shared today. So thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.